Coming up on Network Africa today, Sudan's warring factions sign agreement for a 7-day ceasefire. 10 dead, 37 critically ill in South Africa's cholera outbreak. Plus 20 arrested in DR Congo opposition protest. Hello and welcome to Network Africa on Channels Television. Thanks for joining us. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Let's begin in Sudan, where the warring factions have signed an agreement for a 7-day ceasefire in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. According to a statement from the Saudi side, representatives of the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, signed the agreement for humanitarian purpose. The conflicting parties also agreed to set up a special committee to monitor the implementation of this agreement. It appealed for withdrawing forces from hospitals and resuming services of public facilities. The two parties also agreed to facilitate the safe passage of humanitarian assistance and commodities, allowing goods to flow unimpeded from ports of entry to where the populations need it most. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has called for the warring factions in Sudan to set aside their weapons, expressing sadness at the violence that has continued for more than 1 month in the African nation. According to the latest data from the World Health Organization, more than 1.1 million Sudanese have been displaced because of the armed conflict.
Dear
brothers and sisters, it is sad, but 1 month after the outbreak of violence in Sudan, the situation continues to be serious. Encouraging the partial agreements reached so far, I renew my heartfelt call for weapons to be set aside, and I call on the international community to spare no efforts so that dialogue prevails and that the suffering of the people can be alleviated.
As heavy fighting continues in Sudan, the United Nations has warned that a wave of deadly attacks is targeted at West Darfur's capital, El Geneina, in recent days, while the UN World Health Organization say that more than 700 people have been killed and nearly 5,300 injured nationwide. The WHO spokesperson, Carla Drydell, said the health facilities and health professionals have continued to be targeted since the fighting began on April the 15th in Geneva, where there have been 34 verified attacks, 8 deaths and 18 injuries.
Since the fighting have started, we're making an urgent appeal for the safety of civilians and to allow humanitarian aid to move into Sudan as we continue to scale up our response for the over 1 million people who have now been recorded as displaced within Sudan or to neighboring countries. Around 88,000 refugees hosted by Sudan have fled Khartoum for safety in White Nile, Gedaref, Kassala, Madani, and Port Sudan. In those locations, UNHCR is delivering critical assistance, including, of course, shelters, household items, clean water and sanitation, healthcare and education support for refugees and other people who are displaced.
Overall, 5,287 injuries, 705 deaths. Khartoum State, 3,254 injuries, 203 deaths.
Authorities say some 25.7 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance in Sudan as deadly armed clashes between the Sudanese army and the RSF continue. Metema, a town linking Ethiopia with Sudan, has seen 700 to 800 people crossing the border every day since the clashes began. There were also Ethiopians who worked in Sudan returning to their own hometowns as they had no choice but to ensure their own safety.
The needs are huge. We still people after a long journey, people arriving in dire conditions must be assisted with accommodation, food, transport, access to water and sanitation. They need their services and these are lacking.
Meanwhile, the eastern Chad had been hosting 400,000 Sudanese refugees for the last 20 years. Now, the region is witnessing an even bigger influx of these refugees as the fighting in Sudan rages on. The Gaga refugee camp is one of the only 2 refugee camps in the eastern part of Chad. For the last 2 decades, this camp has hosted roughly 28,000 Sudanese refugees. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, is now planning to relocate 10,000 new refugees to Gaga camp. The refugee agency already is expanding the infrastructure in that camp to accommodate the new arrivals. So far, 1,000 of them have been settled at the Gaga refugee camp.
We have so far put services, like let's say family shelters for to host, let's say 2,000 refugees, but the construction of the family shelters is still ongoing. We have also put, established water infrastructure and sanitation, and we are even putting solar public lights, to ensure that we use it as a measure to prevent gender-based violence.
Let's now talk to Mariama Diallo, VOA Africa's correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya. Hello, Mariama, and Happy New Week.
Hello, Anne. I'm happy to be here today with you again.
All right. So we know you are in Kenya, but you're carefully following events unfold in Sudan. Talk to us about the current situation now.
Well, thank you again for having me. It looks like, I think, the latest that we are noticing, it looks like that both parties right now are just basically trying to gain ground on each other. They're trying to fight as hard as possible before the latest 7-day ceasefire gets put into effect in about a few hours. It's supposed to take place at 9:45 local time. I think right now it's about 5:07 p.m. in Sudan. So basically, in about 4 to 5 hours, the latest ceasefire is supposed to go into effect. Basically, reports of airstrikes have been noticed in Khartoum, in the usual places, in Bahri and in Omdurman. We also spoke to another representative from the Norwegian Refugee Council, who told us that fighting also on the other side of Sudan, not just in Khartoum, Bahri and Omdurman, in Janina, you talked about it earlier, in the Western Darfur area. Basically, about hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people have been going through a lot of violence. Fighting has been very intense in that area, and they haven't been able to actually render help. Because of the intensity of the fighting recently in the past week.
A new 7-day ceasefire has already been agreed between the 2 warring sides. And as you said, in just about a few hours, that will be taking effect. We know many ceasefires have failed in the past. I mean, one side agreeing, the other side not agreeing. Do you have eyes and ears on ground? Is this truce really playing out? Do you think it will play out well, like what has happened in the past?
Well, I guess you well said. The experience has been basically a lot of failed ceasefires. I think the difference this time, I think we're going to find out in a few hours, is that, the warring representatives of the warring factions have been meeting, as we know, in Saudi Arabia, with the help of the United States and other partners, and in the past 2 weeks have brokered this new 7-day ceasefire. I think a lot of people are not holding their breath because, the experience has been that the ceasefires have come and gone. But the difference on this one is that this time, I think this newest agreement is talking about basically having a monitoring mechanism, which is a new thing that we've seen with this latest agreement. So I guess we'll find out in a few days. I think monitoring ceasefires are costly, whether it's in money and in time. Maybe, hopefully, the United States and Saudi Arabia and their partners are going to basically come up with the tools and the mechanism and of how to basically, how are they going to monitor it, who's going to pay for it, and who's going to be doing it. So I think there are a lot of questions that basically surround this new agreement. And about violation, what happens if one of the party violates the newest agreement. So I guess all of these questions we'll find out in a few days this week, whether the newest agreement will hold, and then if it holds, how are they going to basically, make it happen? Like basically make that have the monitoring mechanism be implemented. I think that is the biggest question this week, definitely.
Mariama, several organizations have been intervening, talking about ending the war. But how well would you say the Saudi-US talks has influenced this conflict?
Well, I think it has definitely influenced the talks, the dialogue, because what we've seen the past month is that, if for nothing, it's like everybody has tried. I keep saying this and bringing it back on the table. At the highest levels, officials at the highest levels, whether it's the United Nations, Secretary General, whether it's some people from the European Union, the African Union, the Middle East, the Arab countries, the IGAD bloc as well. So a lot of people have tried basically to broker truce, to just to make some progress in ending or at least slowing this war. So I think Saudi Arabia and the United States, what they've been able to accomplish at this point is to have the representatives of both parties, which is the first time, sitting down, not for 1 week, for almost 2 weeks, and coming up with agreements. Nobody walked out. They listened to each other. I'm not sure. Actually, I wasn't in the room, so I should not speculate, but at least a result came out of it. I think we'll see how much influence it has if it actually works. So
all right.
The ceasefire will take place at 9:45 p.m. in a few hours. I guess tomorrow, next day, and the following day, we'll find out if it really works.
We know the Pope, that's Pope Francis, has weighed in on this conflict. He has called for the factions in Sudan to set aside their weapons. But will they hit this? Do you see this as a step for both parties to even come together for a peaceful settlement, even after the ceasefire that they have planned?
Well, I think the Pope expressing sadness at this violence that has gone on for a month, and I think what I take from his speech, what I take from what he said, was the fact that he calls on the international community to keep pushing for dialogue, and I think the important thing that I took out of it was telling the world not to get used to war, because I think it's very easy. I mean, I, as a journalist, have noticed in the past month how much time the conflict in Sudan used to take. It was, the opening headlines, and then people talk about it. But as the weeks go, it loses steam. People get used to it, and I think that's what Pope Francis, the Pope, was talking about, and also talking about. I'm sure he was thinking about the Ukrainian war as well. It feels like it was yesterday when that started. And it's already been over a year. So I think that's what I took out of his speech. And also the fact that he is the Pope. If the talks didn't work for all of the highest levels of officials who have tried to broker truce, who have tried to talk about dialogue, who have pleaded for humanitarian workers, open corridors for humanitarian workers to be able to come in. If all of that did not work, maybe the Pope will, the speech from the Pope will soften their hearts. That's the hope.
That's the hope, and that's the prayer that's on everyone's lips right now. But thank you very much, Mariama Diallo, VOA correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for your contribution, as always, on Network Africa.
Thank you, Anne, for having me.
In just a moment after the break. Benin's homegrown fertilizer thrives amid shortage. We'll bring you the details of this and more. Please stay with us. Welcome back. So, security forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo have arrested about 20 people following opposition protest in the capital, Kinshasa. In its assessment of this demonstration, the Congolese National Police say that 20 included individuals who allegedly vandalized the Kiaza police station were included. Police say that at least 127 law enforcement forces were injured, and 3 of whom were in serious condition. Actually, the CD says the journalist was also beaten up by a gang of overexcited protesters. But earlier, reports say that 23 police officers and 14 civilians were injured during the violence. The demonstrations were organized by 4 opposition parties to protest against the high cost of living, widespread insecurity in the eastern part of the country, and the lack of transparency in preparations for elections, which is scheduled for December. And in South Africa, the health authorities say an outbreak of cholera has killed at least 10 people in the country's most populous province of Gauteng. At least 95 people have visited hospitals showing cholera symptoms in the area in the north of the capital, Pretoria. The Gauteng Health Department say the lab tests confirmed at least 19 people had cholera. Authorities are now asking the public to take extra precautionary measures and maintain proper hand hygiene. The city of Shawnee is warning residents of the area and surrounding areas not to drink water from their taps, adding that their water tankers were being supplied. Meanwhile, the main opposition party in South Africa says that it is asking the anti-corruption watchdog to investigate what it says are inflated contracts for the upkeep of ministers' lavish homes. This is coming after the ANC government revealed that between 2019 and 2022, it had spent nearly $5 million maintaining dozens of properties occupied by public servants. The controversy adds pressure on South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was elected on promises to root out corruption after his predecessor, Jacob Zuma's term was marred by political and financial scandals. Alleging brazen corruption, the opposition Democratic Alliance says the bill for bulbs was almost $1,000 at one ministerial mansion in Pretoria. Then there was $7,000 of kitchen renovation and $2.5 million spent on generators in ministers' homes, while most have been struggling with South Africa's worst power cuts. In Malawi, the government says that it is investigating a mysterious fire in the capital that destroyed offices of key government departments holding sensitive information. The fire gutted the last top 2 floors of the 7-story building housing government buildings, destroying the contracting units, a department in the president and the cabinet's office. The community services department in the country's judiciary was also gutted by fire, reported to have started at around 11 p.m. local time. Information and Digitalization Minister Moses Kunkuyu says the probe led by the police, supported by other security agencies, was underway to establish the cause of the fire. Still in Malawi, it grapples with the devastation caused by tropical cyclone Freddy in the month of March. United Nations Children's Fund, the UNICEF, has warned that at least 573,000 children under 5 are at risk of suffering from malnutrition. Despite recent progress in reducing chronic malnutrition, acute food insecurity, compounded by recurrent climate shocks, preventable disease outbreaks, economic instability, and chronic underfunding in the social sectors, they all threaten to reverse past gains already made. 659,000 people are currently internally displaced, including many children, following tropical cyclone Freddy. A new humanitarian action for children appeal launched by UNICEF shows an increase in malnutrition cases among the children in Malawi over the last 5 years, with the challenge accelerating significantly in recent months. In 2023 alone, it estimated that over 62,000 children aged between 6 to 59 months are at risk of severe acute malnutrition, often called wasting. To respond to the urgent needs of 6.5 million people, including 3.3 million children, UNICEF has now increased its appeal for Malawi from 52.4 to 87.7 million US. Now, this funding will be used to meet priority needs like ready-to-use therapeutic food and treating severe acute malnutrition, access to safe drinking water, sanitation, hygiene items, health, nutrition, education, child protection services, and cash transfer schemes. From Malawi, let's head to the United Arab Emirates, where our correspondent Mayowa Adegoke has been reporting on the work permit issue for Nigerians in that country. Today, she reports that 3 female professionals turned solopreneurs seem to have found a way to make lemonade, despite the lemons the situation presents for countless others. Take a look.
It's been almost 2 years of work permit restriction for Nigerian workers in the UAE. And while life has become quite difficult for many white-collar workers, solopreneurship has paved the way to financial sustenance for others. Damilola Usalu is a trained accountant by profession and now a fashion designer by circumstance. Today, her 2-year-old Africa-inspired fashion brand, Usalu Couture, is the only African brand invited to showcase at this event. Yet another testament that her brand is gaining momentum on the local fashion scene.
I would say it's the best decision I could have made at that time, because if I look at the space of 2021 till now, the experience, the lessons, my mistakes, the exposure I've had over the space of 2 years, I don't think a 9-to-5 will have given me that in all sincerity. So no, I do not regret this decision.
Just one month. Yeah. But I've been doing.
Backstage, Simbiat Oladikuko, another trained accountant, is busy prepping models for the runway. Her beauty business, Oasis, saved her from many months of seeking employment.
Some months, I make ×2 of what I would have gotten as a professional accountant. Yes, not to say there are months that are low and there are lots of months which are way higher. I still prefer this, because this gives me time, it gives me time to relax, it gives me time for my family, for my child, and I still make as much as I would as a professional makeup artist. So yes, this is way better for me.
Yeah! Hey! Woo!
In another part of town, dance class is in session.
And then we go 1, 2, we move in here, in here.
Lean Christian, a computer science and technology graduate, turned to dancing as a career in 2021 after working different jobs. She says she's better off now as a dancer.
I would never go back to 9 to 5. Never. I'm sorry. I love y'all 9 to 5 people, but no, never, never. I love dancing. I'm doing what I love, and it's giving me. Actually, I've earned more money here than I would ever earn as what I used to do before. So yes.
In a short span of time, Lena's worked her way to the top, appearing on stage for major concerts with many international artists. All 3 ladies say their skills have saved them from harsh realities other Nigerians in the labor market are likely to face, and encourage others to consider alternative means to make a decent living in the UAE. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Mayowa Adegoke, Channels Television News.
The war in Ukraine has caused a global shortage of fertilizer, but in Benin Republic, a locally made alternative is yielding better and more abundant crops, according to its users. Fertilizer manufacturer Arnaud Bonu believes it's just a matter of time before demand for his brand grows.
Tomato farmer Jerome Zinzu hasn't felt the impact of a global shortage in fertilizer. 2 years ago, he switched to an all-natural alternative made locally in his country, Benin. Since then, he says his crops are better and more abundant. Just a few miles away, the product's inventor is collecting ingredients. Arnaud Bonu uses leaves, dried soybeans, and crushed snail shells. They are then added to other elements, including flour, dirt, and cooking oil.
We sell our fertilizers most of the time to organizations that support producers who work towards a kind of food security and food self-sufficiency.
It's called Maggi Cook, And demand for Bunu's nutrient-packed fertilizer has soared since the start of the Ukraine conflict. He says his sales rose more than tenfold between 2021 and 2022. Farm retailer Steve Hoda sells Magico products.
Donc vous n'êtes sans savoir qu'on est dans un contexte aujourd'hui où il y a la crise entre la Russie et l'Ukraine.
This is a fertilizer that is produced locally by young Africans, young Beninese, and therefore facilitates accessibility.
Hoda says his producers have seen a better quality of harvest, meaning they can sell more and at above market prices. Advocates argue that organic fertilizers like Bunu's have a stronger, more durable impact on crops. In addition, they do not degrade soil in the long run. That's why Bunu believes demand for products like his will continue to grow.
That's Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.